Welcome, everyone, to our session on understanding digital identity and its impact on legal with Joe Raczynski. I'm Alicia Copeland. I'd like to introduce the presenter, Joe Raczynski. He is an innovator and early adopter of all things computer-related. His primary focus is around the future of technology, and he speaks around the world about legal technology, cybersecurity, blockchain, artificial intelligence, cryptocurrency, and drone technology. He writes about the future of technology and its impacts on as a crossroad of our personal and professional lives, especially in the legal sector. He also co-hosts a podcast with a tech focus and serves as mentor with the Columbia IBM Blockchain Accelerator, is a cybersecurity committee member at the University of South Florida, and is a presidential committee appointee to the American Bar Association's Center for Innovation Governing Council. Currently, Joe is with Thomson Reuters Legal, managing a team of technologists for the large law, corporate, and government divisions in the U.S. Joe serves the top law firms in the world, consulting on legal trends and customizing Thomson Reuters legal solutions for enhanced workflows. You can connect with Joe at his two websites, joetechnologist.com or josephraczynski.com, or on Twitter at JoeRaz. And with that, I will hand it over to Joe. Thank you.
Alicia, thank you so much. Hey, I'm looking forward to this big time. I think this is a really cool topic, and I hope you'll find the same sort of thing. This is one of those topics that we talk about, and we hear about it in the ether all the time, about what's going on in the world when it comes to our data privacy, and the future of what's going to go on with that in terms of cybersecurity and ownership of information. All of those pieces start to come together. So today, really want to get our arms around the idea of identity and what we're going to be looking at going forward, how it's going to have an impact on your practice, what you're doing in the space, ownership of information. It touches every single area you can possibly think of, from e-discovery to transactional. Identity, us, who we are, how we represent ourselves, where data comes from. It all ties together. It's all immersed and enmeshed together, I would say. So here are the topics today that we're going to go through. A word cloud. So I want to give you a brief idea of some of the things that we're going to go through and discuss, sort of a teaser, so to speak. So we'll do a word cloud. We'll do something on Davos, very she. So we'll talk about Davos and what they're thinking about in this space as it applies to a global audience. We'll talk about the current identity crisis. Why are we even talking about digital identity here? Well, there's a tangible reason for that, and we're going to get into that piece as well. We need to get into really what the essence of identity is, because there are lots of definitions, there are a lot of components in this, and as we become more digital, this stuff starts to expand in its depth and breadth of where we're going in that space. Then we'll get into one of my favorite topics, the future of things, right? So the future of identity, what that looks like, what newer technologies are coming into play that will help us sort of protect ourselves and protect our organizations, law firms, corporations, government agencies. All of that information will now be in a hopefully better containerized version of what it really is supposed to be. And through that, we're talking about tokenized identity. So I'll define that, I'll describe it, I'll give you a few examples, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that if you ever want to reach out and talk about it. And of course, blockchain technology is a part of this. I'm a blockchain enthusiast, so you'll hear a little bit. I will tease you with some ideas there as well. So here's your word cloud of the day. GDPR. I'm sure everyone has heard of this at this point in time, but we're talking about privacy that really was pushed forward by the EU. But we're starting to see that filter across. It's almost like they sneezed over there, and then clearly the United States, we caught the cold. So California and now Virginia are all looking at these data privacy regulations and what we can do to help safeguard information, because it's time. I mean, it seriously is time, and we'll get into a reason why for that. A lot of it has to do with security. What we're dealing with in the security realm is exceedingly difficult to wrap your arms around that. So we'll see more on that space. This is a company that I came across several years ago, but the concepts that they have ushered forward make so much sense when we're talking about the data privacy, how you can protect information, be it at the law firm, be it your own personal information. So trust commerce is one of them. We'll talk about traits. This is exceedingly straightforward, but it's important to set the context for where we're going as what a trait means and what it is as we go forward. We'll talk about encryption. You might be like, Joe, I understand what encryption is, or I get the idea behind it. But you know what? I want to bake it out for you because I think it's kind of a cool thing. And hopefully the example that I give makes some sense in the broader perspective, because encryption's everywhere. And what we're going to see is more and more of it across the board, which is a very good thing. But I want to set context for that as well. And there you go, blockchain popping up again. Michelle Obama. Yeah, no, I put that in there. Michelle Obama. We're going to talk a little about Michelle Obama. We're going to go through a bit of an example about how she would walk through a trip that she's taken to the Bahamas. So I kind of like this one, but we'll see. Tokenization. So we'll talk about tokenization as well, because that's sort of a general theme for the direction of potentially where we're going to go with digital identity. Those are your words of the day. And now let's get started on sort of unpacking each and every one of these. The Davos report, I wish I had my tie on, looks like a beautiful place in Switzerland that I would love to go to someday. But more seriously, what did they do? Well, a few years ago, they said, we need to really concentrate on digital identity because it is going to be the foundation for everything going forward. What are we used to? I've become an older gentleman at this point in time, but my era, basically everything's kind of paper in some sense, right? So my birth certificate, clearly my driver's license, all of these things are something that I had to go through. I had to go, my parents obviously had to get my birth certificate, make sure that everything was filed. Maybe I went through, of course, the hospital back then. All of that is tangible, it's paper. And then if I want to get my social security number, all of those things are, again, things that people had to submit and prove that you did. You may even have to go down to one of the offices and ask for that sort of thing. Those are the things that we saw and what we're used to. But the turning point is now, and probably over the last, let's say, 10 years, such that 60% of the world's GDP will be digitized in the next year or so. That's crazy significant and has cascading effects on the way we operate, the way we work, the way we serve our clients, our customers. Because of all that information being thrown onto a computer, onto servers, onto nodes across the world, which is a frightening concept, but all that information's out there, it's digitized. We need to think about how you relate individuals, organizations to that information, whether it's siloed, whether it's protected, whether it's encrypted, all of those bits and bytes, how they interact together. So big deal there, right? Now, taking a step back from, let's say most of us are probably in the United States right now, maybe it filters out to the UK or Australia. But there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people, 1 billion. So that's 1/7 of the entire world that does not have a recognized form of identity. And this comes from the World Bank. And to that end, 60% of lower income people don't have that sort of information, which is very difficult, because when you're starting to talk about equity and people having access to everything, you're missing the boat when people don't have a digital identity, which is the core basis for information. So if I wanted to buy a property, a lot of, they say, what is it, 75% of the world doesn't have a deed to a property, which is remarkable to think about. Ownership of property is typically seen as the bedrock for having building a financial future, right? So if you can't prove that, you can't prove your identity, then those individuals are lost without that. So obviously we need to move in the other direction. And in this sense, we're talking about 30% of men don't have access to this, and even more women. So more women do not have access to that to an identity at all, which is unbelievable to think about. And of course, that we're talking about discrimination and personal harm to individuals, especially in other areas of the world. So that's a key component to this, especially as Davos was looking at that. So we obviously have to be omnipresent in thinking about that part. Some more statistics before we get into the real meat of this sort of thing. but across the globe. So if we're talking about now it's 7.7 billion people in the world, we all, most of us who are listening to this, probably fall into that little bucket that you see over on the left-hand side, bottom left-hand side, 3.2 billion. So we have probably some form of digital identity and that digital trail. That scary digital trail, which means that anything you've posted online, whether it's on Facebook or LinkedIn or any blogs you've written, all of that is part of your history now, clearly. Then you go to the right-hand side, which is kind of an interesting group. That's the 3.4 billion that have some form of digital identity, but no digital trail. And I think back to Eric Schmidt from Google, who helped run Google many years ago. I think he's retired from that. Now he does some other things. But he said, and this kind of made me chuckle, but also made me shiver, was this idea that pretty much anyone who's like 18 to 25, people kind of overshared, maybe, to each their own. They may have overshared information, whether it be TikTok or Instagram or any one of those types of things. They have a lot of information out there. They might be at parties, at whatever they're doing, a lot of information, and their name typically is tied to that. So when they go to interviews at 24, 25, 26, whatever, when they're out of law school or grad school or wherever, after whatever universities they went to, if they decide to go that path, that's tied to them, such that anybody could look at that, and it's a frightening concept. So what he suggested was that once you graduate from college or whatever, you feel you want to have a clean slate, to submit a new name. And that's the point that we're at, where he's suggesting that you need to shed your name, your full last name, in order to start afresh, start anew. So there's some problems in that in some respects. I mean, it's incisive in some respects, but it's something that we need to really think about. And that's why we're talking about some of this right now. So last statistics that I want to throw out there. And this is from McKinsey, as was the last two slides. I thought they did some really thoughtful work here. So across the globe, and we're talking about mature economies as well as emerging economies. As you can see, United States, maybe the UK, there's some benefit clearly for going to the digital identity world, but the vast majority of the world will absolutely benefit. So various countries in Africa, various countries in Asia will completely benefit from this, because they just don't have the tracking mechanisms right now to be able to leverage these types of things for people to create these identities and leverage that for their positive gains. So more to come on that in just a bit. And back to the thought that I had in terms of inclusivity. And this is increasingly becoming far more important, something that we have not really had as much emphasis on. But this is a big deal for people having access to this type of thing that then spreads out to other abilities for them to then wrap their arms around those types of things as well. So here we go. The current crisis. How did we even get here? Well, it's been a ride, I would say. The ride starts off with some picture that I'd like to paint with breaches. So all of these companies that you see on your screen have had these crazy breaches, and we've trusted them, and we've had no real reason before all of this to not trust them for the most part. What you see are universities. You're talking about large corporations, some of the biggest ones in the world. You're talking about government agencies, massive breaches where individuals, bad guys, have gone in, broken into their servers, pulled this information out, and they've only gotten bigger over time. I mean, significant amounts of information, people being, all their information, whether it be social security numbers, maybe their credit card information. As you can see, they've gotten big. We'll stop with Equifax, because I think this is one that we can all sort of think about and resonate. And sadly, I will mention what happened. And I know you all know this, but here's maybe some more data that's not as popularly spoken about. So 160 million people in the United States. That's roughly 1 out of every 2 of us that's listening to this right now. Your information, social security information, all the places you've lived, obviously your full names, maybe you've changed your names because of marriage or what have you, all that information's out there. In the beginning, they thought all that information was on the dark web. Ooh, that dark web, right? More likely it's not, and I'm not trying to cast aspersions here. I will cite, let's see, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. They believe now, because they have not been able to find it on the dark web, that perhaps, and again, perhaps, China may have this information. Why would they have this information? Well, because now they have your digital identity. They have your bits and bytes of information about who you are. You might be like, why does China care? Well, and again, just saying that this is let's pretend that this is fake, but building out this picture. Why would an entity like China care? Well, because they could actually build out a profile about you, and then they do another research about you, and you've become, quite successful in what you've done. And now you are a partner at a law firm. You're Jill Smith, and you're a partner at the law firm, maybe managing partner. Yeah, she's managing partner. So she has some major sway at the organization. And what they've done is they have this information on you, and now they can build out this further profile about you because a lot of information's out there. You go to a lot of conferences, you lecture about a lot of these things, and they can build this profile out about you. And they have this information, and they can put you in a bit of a compromising situation. They could say, hey, we have all this information about you. We want you to do X, Y, and Z. And they're like, well, if you don't, then we can, cause all sorts of turmoil for you because we have this information. A frightening concept, but that's what people have extrapolated from this type of breach. Not a good thing. And so again, we're at a point where when you could have 160 million individuals breached in all their records, something needs to change. And so that's what the best minds in the world are trying to do, is come up with a way to change this dynamic. The system is broken, right? So we're talking about Equifax, as we mentioned, the breaches. And on the screen, I know it's a little bit on the smaller side, and I've spent a lot of time for the good helping out various groups and organizations on the dark web. So doing research, trying to figure out what's working, what's not working, and there was and still is a good cause for the dark web. But one of the bad causes for this is that people clearly can take those credit card numbers, can take those hacked PayPal accounts and sell them. And what you see up on the screen right now is someone's digital imprint taken down to the dark web, and their account has been basically flushed such that you can go down there, and if you want to, you can buy. In this first account, I have to get close to the screen, so sorry. You can see this first person has their internal ID, and their balance for euros is basically 1,391 euros, and you can basically buy that for 10%. So you spend $177 in Bitcoin or another currency called Monero, which is far more safe in that world. And you would actually buy that account, and then you would then, of course, use it very quickly to get rid of it. But that's, again, another breach that people have been able to take advantage of. So again, we need to start to fix these things. The last one, you might be like, because you're all attorneys, you're like, who's misspelled this? Like, what's going on there? It's supposed to be that way. It's have I been pwned, basically owned. So when the original person that misspelled that, it's become sort of a meme, right? It's one of these things that people use. You can actually go to this site, and if you ever want to know how many of your records have been breached, so basically let's use a Home Depot example, and find out whether or not your Home Depot information has been breached, maybe it's your login, your password, maybe it's your credit card information. You can actually put in an email address or a typically used username, and you can click pwned, and it will tell you all of the different sites that you can go to that have been breached. And this has been verified, just because I was nervous, like, this sounds like a place where they can collect information on me. But this has been verified in many of the news outlets at this point in time. So it's something that's out there. Basically, someone took a deep dive of all the information on the dark web, put it into a database, and said, okay, this is everything that people are trying to sell or information that's been breached out there. Okay, so the cause. Why the heck are we seeing this right now? Well, as you can see on your screen, those are silos, cryptic silos of information. So what we're traditionally used to seeing are every one of the organizations you can think of that you've ever interacted with, be it a storefront, be it a government agency, have silos of information. Basically, they have their own databases full of information about you, right? And with that, you get to the point of many points of attack. So you can go after each one of those. Typically, that information has not been encrypted. It's all in the clear, as they would say. So it's in the clear. which allows people to just, once they're able to breach into that database, pull those records out, and then now they have a database of all that information. So it's document centric, means that it's easy to look through this information and figure it out, unfortunately. So the group that clearly put this at the forefront, and there's been a lot of different initiatives around the world, is GDPR, right? So the EU pulled this together several years ago. Now we have in California, but these are the primary tenets. And in my early career, I worked for what was called the Better Business Bureau Online, so BBB Online. And our focus was around helping people create and craft privacy policies. So attorneys and I worked together and said, hey, let's figure out what makes the most sense here with respect to crafting a privacy policy. And there were basically 5 tenets in that to help people get access to that information, to edit that information, a security component to that, right? And these are all now built into these types of privacy protection regulations that we're seeing more and more, and eventually we'll see it obviously cascade throughout the entire United States, hopefully at a federal level. But these include, of course, lawful, fair, and transparent processing, limitation on purpose of data and storage, and then going all the way through to consent and personal data breaches and what you do in those instances. And I know, and I've worked with a lot of law firms who have been through this. What do you do when the firm has been breached and it's been taken down for 2 weeks, sometimes longer? How is that information treated? How do you recover that information? How do you go back to customers and say, hey, clients, this happened, your information is set, or maybe it's not? Those types of conversations are things that clearly people are talking about now, but it goes back to the identity of individuals as well. So identity. Now, there are 2 questions that we typically pose. Very, very straightforward, but it's sometimes important to sort of take a step back, look at the basis for this before we go forward into the future of what we're going to see. So are you really a person? Yes, I know, but there's a lot of fake names and numbers and individuals that have been created, especially as we hear more and more about this going forward. We start to say, okay, are you who you say you are? How do you verify that someone is who they are? I mean, all the people that we see on, let's say, Twitter or Facebook, not the majority, but a high percentage of Twitter accounts as well as Facebook accounts are fake accounts. And this is something that they have verified themselves. People have come up and created their own names or whatever the case is. So how do you verify that? How do you go about the process of making sure that that person is who they are? Those are key components to building out that digital identity. So of course, we need to look at that component of this whole thing. All right, identity by the numbers, right? The average person has 27 discrete logins. I dare say, and that is on the low side. I would gather that I started going through it and I got up to 55 and then I got tired and I was like, I can't keep doing this. I wouldn't doubt if I had 100 discrete logins. Probably for work, I may have 25. I mean, there's so many different things that we log into for almost every single account. It becomes just overwhelming at this stage to be able to handle and grapple with all these different things. So another piece is 37% of people forget a password every week. I dare say I probably forget a password every single day. And it's frustrating to have to click on, I forgot my login or I forgot my password. I forgot both. And the idea, of course, because I tend to do a lot of cybersecurity stuff, is everything should be different. Everything should be unique, because once they have something, then they could just cascade and look at all the other accounts and say, okay, I know Joe's login and password for this account. Well, he probably used it for every other one. That's the big no-no, of course, big no-no there. So these are the types of things that we think about. And then 1.1 billion people are unable to prove their identity, as we talked about before. I met with a law firm not long ago, and the CIO was telling me that he required all of his attorneys, all of his support staff to have a 25 character password, which is like a full sentence. He was saying, they all need to put a full sentence in there. So they had their login and they had their login ID, and then 20, whatever, 5-ish characters. It gets to be ridiculous. I mean, I respect that and totally makes sense, but at some point it gets to be ridiculous because it becomes so elongated. How do we handle that? How do we deal with that? How do we work with it? leading up to the future of hopefully what makes things easier for all of us, especially as we try to protect our clients' information. So identity and our management of it is everywhere. So here's the scenario. All right, so bear with me. This is a little little silly, but here we go. So guess who's going on vacation? Well, you got it. Michelle Obama is going on vacation. So I'm very happy for her. I think the world of her. She's awesome. So here we go. She's excited because she gets to go to the Bahamas. She may be taking the ex-president along with her, but here she may just go on a girls' trip. So she's going there. So what does she need to do? I think about, all right, let's get serious. What does she actually need to do? Well, she needs to book her ticket. And then she's ready to go. So good for her. She goes on to maybe kayak.com and she sets up her account. She books it. She's good to go on that side. Then, well, she's got to take the Uber to the airport. I'm based in DC and she doesn't live too far away from me, but she lives in a really nice area over near DuPont Circle, if you know the area, Calorama, beautiful area. So she's over there, but she needs to take the airport, a trip over to the airport. So I know she probably gets a special security detail, but I'm just bear with me for a second here. So she jumps in her Uber. So she has her Uber account and she's got great rating there, by the way. She has her Uber account, but when she set that up, she has to put her credit card information in there. She has to put her identity in there. So she is creating her own identity just for that app. That's a host of information. That's important. She has her picture in there. That's just one place thus far. Now she needs to go through airport security. So she's got her Uber, she cruises on over to National Airport, not far away from me. And what does she need to do? So she's going international. And so she's got her passport, yet another identification. So she's got her passport, good to go. And maybe she's using that. And maybe she's using that cool clear system, which I haven't yet gone down the road of, but hopefully soon we'll be able to do that. So she uses biometric. So she's using her fingerprints. Maybe she's using the iris scan. So all of that information is being collected. Now that's a private company, clearly connected to the public records that we have with the federal government. So yet another identity that she has to think about or be concerned about. Now she lands, she's all set. She cruises into her hotel right on the beach, beautiful palm trees, white sands, water coming in. Lucky her. So what does she do? She goes up, she's about ready to check in. She has her American Express Black card, top-notch stuff. So she has to use that, of course, to pay. Plus, they want an identification. She decides to break out her license, yet another 2 identifiers, right? So she has her license, she has her Black card. Awesome, good to go, ready, set. She goes back, she's relaxing. Time to be by the pool, maybe by on the beach. So she's got her Twitter open. There she goes. And I know this is a dated tweet if you look at it too closely, but you get the idea. She breaks out yet another application that has yet another set of identification that she created this account. It has her information, has specialty information because she's a highfalutin person, very important person. So yes, another identity point. And if you think about that, right there, you have 6, 7, 8 different identity points that all could be compromised, that all takes our personal effort to make sure that is protected. But that's a problem. I mean, that's a problem in many different respects because it's tough to control all this information. It's tough to track all that information. So that's the scenario that we're up against right now. And this I'll blitz through a little bit because I think it's important for us to just get a glimpse as I build towards this. There are certain traits when we look at identity that we really cannot change. And I'll say this by 99.9% of these traits we don't change. Some are a little bit more, but for the most part, let's just say it's at that high level. Your birth date. More often than not, your birth date has been secured. Now, I have a few friends, a few attorney friends that are basically like, yeah, I was born in a different country and my mom doesn't know my birth date. It was either one of these 3 days. And so it's generally accurate, but for most of us, I would say that we're pretty certain on what that is. So that's a trait, meaning that we typically don't change that. The name. For the most of us, I know some of these names can change, clearly. Get married or whatever the case is. Sometimes people decide to change their name, like the example I gave earlier. If you want to change your identity at 22, 23 as you go into the work world, maybe that's the case. But more often than not, We don't. It's part of our traits. Location, maybe where we're born or whatever the case is, that's usually exacting and something that we can say is our trait. And of course, this typically doesn't change at all, but your biometrics, your irises, your fingertips, um, whatever the case is, those things are considered something that's part of who you are. That's very difficult to change typically. And then you got the legal documents, right? So you've taken those traits, ported them over and said, yes, this is when I was born. This is, the place that I was born. And those are then ported over into our legal documents so that we can then verify a little bit more on top of that, the basics, birth certificate, and of course, social security number, and then of course your license. And I don't know how McLovin got on there, but he did. So your license, right? So all of these pieces are a core component as we build identities of what we carry with us the rest of our lives and typically don't change. Okay, so we're able to leverage this once we have the traits, then you build out that legal document so you start to get verified. But this is the next layer that we're seeing much more of, and we have seen for the last, I'd say 15 or 20 years at the very least. Cookies, right? So anything and everything you do online is typically tracked. Now, you may have seen the latest headlines, which came out, I'd say about 10, 15, whatever days ago, where Google, and this is kind of an earth-shattering thing for people in this industry, believe it or not, but Google is taking away third-party cookies, which means that you go to a Google website, go on to whatever, let's say a search or something along those lines, and then you click on some advertising. That advertiser typically is a third-party advertiser, drops something on your computer that basically tracks you, across every single site that you go to. I know you all know what cookies are, but just for reference, third-party means that you're not opting into, no, you may opt into it at this point, depending on where you are in the world, but that third party is tracking you. Typically, you go to Amazon, they have first party cookies, which means that Amazon knows who you are, and Amazon can then curtail everything towards you. It knows who you are, knows your preferences. That's because you're on their website, you're following through. But then sometimes you may go to another site and you see the stuff that you've searched on Amazon. That would be a third party, typically, cookie. So cookies are definitely probably something that will fade away in the not too distant future. Now, IP addresses. I think you all know what an IP address is, but here's a kind of a nifty little tidbit that I think is fascinating that maybe some of you aren't as aware of. IP addresses can be almost as accurate as your own personal home address in the sense that you can actually identify specifically an area, sometimes the home, but definitely maybe a few block radius. So get this, people, and this is kind of a bizarre story. So people wanted to target previous President Trump for advertising or to influence him. So what they did was they hired an advertising organization that can leverage IP addresses, and they say, you know what? Obviously, he's at the White House, and they know when he's there, when he's gone down to Mar-a-Lago, whatever, in Florida. And so they timed it, and they said, all right, he's in this particular region, so you can geofence where he lives, obviously the White House. And they knew which websites that he was going on to, because they could say, all right, from his history on Twitter, what he was whatever doing, they can target the websites. And so when they thought, all right, he's going to go to these 10 websites, potentially over the course of this weekend, he's at the White House, they then loaded advertising just for him because they're able to geofence within a 3 or 4 block radius of the White House and target those ads based on that IP address. Wacky stuff. So we're talking about abilities to really confine where you are, knowing what you may go do through the cookies or other ways to target that information. So your identity can be tied to those types of things. And it actually worked. So this advertising company, I forgot what they were trying to advertise directly, but promoted some idea that he eventually tweeted in that concept. And it was kind of out of left field. It wasn't something he had typically tweeted before. Wacky stuff. So again, electronic imprint is big. RFID, you see this more and more. You'll see more and more chips. It stands for radio frequency ID. Basically little chips that they're putting on pallets when they ship things. They'll be on everything else. They'll be on devices that you have that allow you to connect your personal device to something that you can get to the point of of tracking things and people. And then, of course, email is definitely a unique identifier, electronic imprint of information. Okay, so as we go forward here, behaviors are also a part of this. So there's a lot of behaviors out there that we think about and what you do. So if you have Google Maps on, it tracks where you are, whenever you are. So when you see and you use Google Maps and you see there's red ahead and you're driving from, let's say, I-95 going up north to New York, and it sees this red section, it's because all those phones have basically a beacon going to Google. It's not identifying the person necessarily, but it's identifying the phone going up there. If there's a mass of phones that are stopped or slower based on MPH, miles per hour, then it knows that there's a stop, right? So that's what it's using. And that can be tied to the person. And then, of course, tracking information from the phone, the credit card information providers, every single transaction you do. It knows basically where you are. It knows what you've purchased for the most part, at least how much you've spent. Sometimes information about what you purchased. I don't know about that. Okay, encryption. So let's talk about encryption for a second here. Now, this is a crazy one. Now we hear about encryption all the time. I know that. But what I want to do is put out there something that I think people are not as familiar with, and that's public and private keys. What does that mean? Why is it relevant? Well, it's going to become more and more relevant as the potential for this new world order around identity comes to play. So of all places, the history behind encryption comes from Julius Caesar, or at least the legend goes, right? So Julius Caesar wanted to tell his commander in the field something. But way back when, it might take months for Caesar to tell that general, let's call him a general in the field, something. Let's say there's a change of plans. He's like, you know what? I want to go down this front instead of that front. How would he do that? Well, what he did was before the general went to battle, he whispered in his ear, basically a number saying, hey, this is what I want you to do going forward. You're going to get a note from me. It's going to take 3 months to get you there, to get it there. But only this person knows this number shift. And so he whispers it in the general's ear and he's like, okay, what I want you to do is shift forward by 1 letter. So basically just says, you're going to get a bunch of scrambled letters, but shift forward by 1 letter. So that's the key. That's the private key that only the Caesar knows and only the general knows. General doesn't tell anybody, Caesar doesn't tell anybody. And this is what happens. So Caesar's like, all right, I got to change the plans. Like 10 months later, he's like, I got to change the plans. You know, obviously we're not doing well. We need to fix something here. So he writes up this note, and the note is fully encrypted. It's on a piece of paper. It's a bunch of gobbledygook letters, and he seals it up, and he puts his wax seal on it, and he sends it out, puts it on the horse, and the guy, whatever, tromps across, and he heads out, right? He heads out. That's the public key. So anybody could have knocked the guy over the head and said, hey, buddy, I'm going to take this letter that you have that I know is going to the general because I want to steal this. And they open it up. First, the public key basically is that seal, and they open it up and they're like, oh, geez, I can't read any of this. It's gobbledygook. It's a bunch of letters. What does that mean? So anybody could take a look at that, but they cannot read it because they don't have that private key. They don't have the knowledge that says shift forward by 1 letter. So they open it up. They knock the guy over the head. The guy's fine, but they knock him over the head and they say, hey, buddy, I'm grabbing this thing. And they basically say, let me take a look at this. And they look at it like, geez, NJTTZPR in Latin, of course. And you're just like, what the heck? Yeah, it doesn't mean anything to me. So another letter gets out because he sent out multiple letters just to make sure, because he can. And eventually the general gets it. And he's like, all right, good to go. I got this letter. Now let me decrypt it. I know what I need to do is use the alphabet. We'll use our alphabet in this instance, and I need to break this thing down. So if I know the private key, and now you all know the private key, you can do this yourself. Look at N, right? And let's go down to this key here. And if I'm shifting forward by 1 letter, this is really simple, I apologize, you get to M, right? Do the same thing with J. So I'm going over to the J and I shift it to I. All right, let's start breaking this down. First letter is M in the note. The second letter is I. TT, so same thing. So go T, go up 1 letter, SS. All right, miss, okay. And then ZPR. Let's go one letter, one letter. All right. Well, Miss YOU. All right. Well, apparently he wrote he missed them, and that's very thoughtful of him. They must have a close relationship, but you get you get the idea. So we're at a point where that's what encryption is. Whenever anybody says, "Oh, I got encryption," or my computer's fully encrypted, or my bank account's fully encrypted, they use far sophisticated, more sophisticated encryption. But at the basis, that's what encryption is, and that's how the newer tools around identity will start to work. It's cool. It's a little dorky on my part, and I apologize for that. But you get the idea of where this works. So private key is something you hold safe. It's something that only you know about. And this will start to play out more as we all start to talk about blockchain and cryptocurrencies and things like that. And we'll get more into that later at some other point. Maybe if you watch another one of these CLEs, you'll get into this as well. But the public key is something that we can always share with people, and it allows you to prove something. So we'll talk about more of that in a little bit. So the future of identity in terms of its management, and where are we going? So this future is personal ownership and control of all of your own data. Right? So if you had this Equifax breach with 160 million people in the United States, it was a single repository of information where all the bad guy had to do was go in, and they actually used some form that basically people were filling out online, and they attacked what amounted to be a database that was connected into that. And that's how they were able to pull this information out over probably several weeks to a month. So the future is this personal ownership where you have the private key, you have the public key, and you own your own information, right? So this will make it so that you have your personal medical records, your birth certificate, your digital thumbprints. All of that will be self-contained, will be encrypted. It'll be on your device. It'll be on a protected device. So the point where all this information is on one device, you're like, but it's still hackable. Yes, nothing will ever not be hackable, but it won't be at the same extreme where you have a million or a billion documents hacked all at the same time. And a lot of this has to do with blockchain. So I'm gonna go down this direction very quickly. But blockchain is essentially a database, right? And it's the idea that way back in 2009, we had a small financial crisis, and that financial crisis led us to a point where somebody somewhere around the world, could have been a group of people, him or her, basically said, you know what, that Equifax issue is a major mess. The largest banks in the world going under and having ripple effects across the industry is a mess. Those were single points of failure. What do we do to distribute that? So they came up with this idea, and this is where Bitcoin comes from. And the underlying technology behind Bitcoin and all this other blockchain stuff is blockchain. And what they said was, what if we go from this paradigm of single points of failure or single points of information where then everything's in that place, and distribute that to 10,000 computers around the world that are running the same software, that are secure, that are using high levels of encryption that all the banks use. And they somehow bypassed our normal systems. So they go peer to peer. So it's individual to individual, no central banking authority, no government agencies involved. The computers are the third party that verify something. The computers and their algorithms that thus far have been unhackable prove something out. They prove that money is being sent from one person to the other, or that identity or something is being sent from one person to the other. That allows for this whole new world of thinking of private ownership of this information. And so as we go through this, the quick example is, and you can hear more about the blockchain later, we'll maybe potentially talk about that, but if I'm going to send money to Alicia in this example, I have a digital identity. So I have a wallet that has a unique number. I have the private key, do not share with anybody. I have a public key that I can share with her, and she can share with me, such that if I want to send her one, let's use Bitcoin in this example, she sends me her address. It's this elongated nomenclature of numbers and letters. It's kind of awkward right now. That'll shift in time. But she has one, I have one. I then send her one Bitcoin. The computers then say, okay, Joe wants to send one Bitcoin to her. What happens here now? Well, it goes to a grouping of computers that all are running the software, and it verifies, yes, Joe has one Bitcoin in his wallet. if I did. And then it verifies that and it says, okay, it's being sent to Alicia. Boom. Okay, good to go. She's now being sent that money. It's being propagated throughout the system. It's being verified. It's being added to the blockchain, to that database that's distributed. So verified, secured, and it's in a point where it's then added on so that you can always verify that information. You can trust that information. So that's how it typically works. Now, what does this lead us to? Well, it leads us to this idea that we're going to talk about in depth now, the tokenization of all assets, which means that every asset you can ever imagine can be tokenized. So the deed to your property, the Picasso on my wall, right? As if. Everything you could possibly imagine will be tokenized, which is great because then you can then send those types of tokens representing that deed to somebody. So if I own a property and I have the deed to that property, typically it's a piece of paper, whatever the case is, verified by the county or their state. Now you're at a point where you have a digital token that has like its own elongated string of numbers and letters you can verify that's on the blockchain that represents ownership of something, the identity of a property, of something. And then once that money goes into escrow, you can then send that token off to the other person. It then goes into their digital wallet. This changes the dynamic for everything. You got to start to think about how that has implications around e-discovery, of documents, of information, like who has ownership. You're going to start to have to go down this direction of all these pieces as they start to come together. Yeah, deed to your car. So you can see this. So the tokenization and how it's working right now that we really aren't seeing too many people, jump into, but are starting to look at. This is that trust commerce. It's an algorithm basically helps people hide their personal information right now when it comes to just credit cards. So this is how it would work. So with the tokenization of assets and let's say the credit card information, you would download this app. And it has your credit cards. You put your credit card into this information. That's secured. It's safe. It's in the app. Now, locally stored, I should say. It then goes out to a remote server. That remote server then alters that information such that it becomes tokenized. So it's tokenized so that whenever you go out to buy something and you go to the point of sale, you're using that sort of faux number. That's a token. It's actually called a token, and it's processed based on that. So you want to buy this $100 or whatever. You go to the place of service, and the service says, "Okay, I see this token. It's not a credit card information." It goes to that remote server. That's all encrypted, all taken care of, and basically it's saying, "Yes, this token is represented by this actual credit card information," and then it comes back. The tokenization benefits is really about compliance, and obligations can be clearly reduced in this space. So we're talking about sensitive information not being stored anymore. So those individuals, those points of sale don't have to worry about that. So there's less fraud and there's less hacking. And this is what's wild about this. So the digital identities that I'm starting to see, and I was at MIT not long ago and they talked about this and I thought it was amazing to think about. If 1 out of every 2 of us and your social security number is somewhere because of that breach that we heard about, that has to change. So there's a discussion about the Department of Homeland Security now issuing, and we'll see if this happens over the next several years, a brand new version of a social security number. It's not going to be a number that we have on that old school card. So we put on the blockchain. What will that look like? Well, the issuer on the left-hand side, is a little jumbled kind of old school graph here that we see. But the issuer on the left-hand side is basically the Department of Homeland Security. What they're going to do is issue you as an individual the private key and the public key. So you then hold that in your digital wallet. You're good to go. But then it also goes to the public blockchain and it's encrypted, so it's safe. But that means that anytime you want to verify who you are, you can do so. Let's say it's your age. Let's say we're all in one big group and this is in person and we want to go down to happy hour, right? And so what do? Go down to happy hour and there's a big burly bouncer sitting in front of the door and he's like, "You can't come in unless you show me your ID." Well, you break out your ID and what's on that ID, right? Has your picture, has your eye color, maybe your weight, full address, maybe your unique identifier for your ID. What does a bouncer really need to know? Simply your age, whether you're 21 or over. So the new version will have a QR code. You scan that, and the bouncer basically doesn't have access to any of that information. They don't need to know that information. They don't need to know where you live. And it says yes or no. This is what we're going to start to see with sovereign identity. And because of that, and to that end, the digital wallet will blossom, will bloom. You're talking about your birth certificate, your social security number, the new version, your money. The bill, one of the bills that came out during the pandemic, say March, April, May of last year of 2020, had in it the idea that the federal government was going to issue a digital currency. It's going to happen. So the US dollar will be a digital currency in the not too distant future. But what they were going to do was issue this digital currency that allows you to have the digital wallet, and then they're able to send that information to you. So information, dollars to you directly. It bypasses the banks. So you think about this and the implications of that. Then if I have that digital wallet, I could then send that money to whomever else I owe money to, because now you have this digital wallet, you have all this other information. All your logins and passwords could be put in there so that when you go to sites, it knows you and knows you have control over that. And there's a lot of other implications for that. So the digital wallet, the digital identity is moving into this new realm, and we're right on the precipice of full adoption of this. All right, one quick example that I came up with years ago, and I beg your indulgence on this one. So this is a DAO. DAOs are fascinating. They're called decentralized autonomous organizations. Very frightening terminology there. What does that mean? It means that organizations can now take traditional business models. Think about Airbnb. Airbnb is a disruptor to the hotel industry. Airbnb could be disrupted by a DAO. A DAO is using a little bit of code, a lot of lawyers, and basically transforming a business that has 5,000 employees at Airbnb into something that could be done with maybe 20 to 40 employees, because you're using a little bit of code and the blockchain to create digital contracts. So contracts that are almost like if-then statements that are using these autonomous code bases that are on the blockchain that verify things like who you are and what you do, and based on triggers, do things. So you have this digital identity. Right, elongated, long numbers and letters. Yeah, it looks ugly. I know that. You interact with objects, so everything's going to be internet connected, right? And it's already starting to see this. So it might be a doorknob, might be your IoT devices, whatever the case is. And it also has a unique identifier. It has an identity. In this instance, we're talking about a business that is trying to upend Airbnb. And they're called Slockit. So what they do is you go to this site and you build out this profile about your flat in London. You describe it, it's next to the tube, all this great stuff. And your doorknob is a smart doorknob. It's connected to the internet, it has its own identity, and you're able to interact with that because that doorknob has an if-then statement saying, okay, this person books online and it says basically they have access to this doorknob and this door, this place from X date to Y date. Whatever. And then it says, yes, you can have access to it. So I show up with my phone, I scan it, boom. It says, yes, this person has access to it, has its own unique identifier, and it says, you can go into it. And then I leave for the day and it says, okay, Joe's left for the day. Now what's next? Well, maybe we should call up cleaning. It knows that. And it has another digital contract using another identifier. And it goes back out to the blockchain, comes back and says, okay, you can come in. It's kind of the decentralized autonomous organization, a new world order of going through this stuff. Now, I'm checking real quick for the sake of time. All right, a few minutes left. Let me go through this, I guess, really quickly. What's really cool about digital contracts and digital identity is what we'll be able to do with it around the world. So in this instance, we're talking about someone that lives in Africa, let's say Ethiopia, and she owns this plot of land, and she uses that plot of land, one, of course, for sustenance for her family, but beyond that, she's able to parlay some of that to sell. Now, she needs insurance, but it's too expensive typically for her to have insurance because it's just a smaller plot of land, and forget those contracts going. Well, now she's able to leverage smart contracts, her own digital identity, to use a flip phone to connect into sharing with other people the ability to access insurance, her identity, such that they're using opt-in for this so that she gets insurance for that plot of land. Then it's using a little bit of AI, it's using satellites that go every day over her land and says, okay, actually now there's been a drought. And because of that drought, she's actually going to get paid out on that because it's able to see that she's opted into this and automatically she gets paid out on that. So it's using the digital identity, it's using the blockchain to help people. Really cool things that are about to come down the road. Now she has potentially a dispute because let's say that the crops, she didn't get to the point where the crops grew, but she went to a seed provider. Well, she opted into this online dispute resolution. She's saying, I am this individual, I'm opting into this. They made an agreement. It's stored on the blockchain. So there's an independent third party, so to speak, that's taking care of this. But unfortunately, the seeds stink, right? The seeds just were duds. And so she's like, you know what? This isn't fair. And so she's like, I need to create a dispute. She opts into this thing. It's using this smart contract ability, identifying who she is. The arbitrators are put involved into this, using the ability for people around the world to look at the evidence that she puts forward, as well as the other person puts forward, and they're able to come to a decision so that Alice is able to get the money from this. So this is a way that she's able to self-identify, get into the system, and then hopefully leverage these new technologies to be able to do things. All right. The future. We are moving away from these Google having ultimate control of information or Amazon Web Services, right? So the cloud having these big organizations having information. IPFS is a trippy one. Interplanetary file system. Imagine every one of you, you have your phones, you have your computers. Typically there's an extra room on those computers. Well, what if you got paid out to lease out that space on your computer? And anybody from around the world through this machine basically can then store information on there. It's encrypted. You cannot see it. It's encrypted in such a fashion that if it's a 1,000 page brief, portions of it are saved there, and it's encrypted, so you can't make common sense of it at all. But you get paid out on that. So basically every single device connected to the internet can now be part of the cloud. Fascinating stuff. So these things, and your identity is tied to that, so that you know you get access to that or you don't, but you get paid out on those types of things. There's new models coming forth. I don't necessarily have time to go through all of these, but I'll throw them out as something to think about. We're talking about identity. We're talking about a decentralized model around identity where your organization has ownership of this information, control over those pieces of information. And this is propagating into businesses galore. It's a new gold rush around how you can leverage this information to hopefully make it a little more private, to take care of the GDPR requirements, take care of CCPA requirements, Virginia's requirements. All of those things are starting to come together, and it's fascinating to watch. So last thing, closing seconds here. There's been a lot of attempts around the world towards what we could do. In India, you had a centralized database of all citizens' information based on biometric and geography. As we've discussed, maybe that's a challenge, right? Because if you have a central database that has all biometric information, all information on individuals, in theory, it's a great idea, but in practice, it's hackable and not necessarily a good thing. Singapore is quite advanced in this. They're using the blockchain around enabling a lot of these things. Estonia is even further involved, but they've also had some issues with this. Again, leveraging the blockchain around creating digital transactions and identities online. Pretty cool things. The last one I'll close in on, because I know this is kind of trippy, but an extreme on digital identity might be China. If you haven't heard this story already, there's approximately 2.5 million cameras in Beijing alone. They are using digital identity, they're using facial recognition across the board, so that if I were to jaywalk across the street, it knows my face, it's recognizing me, it knows my identity already because I'm registered with the state, and it's giving me a social credit score, which means that I've jaywalked there and then all of a sudden, I don't smoke, but I'm smoking in a corner and behind me there's a do not smoke sign. It's knocking me down on that credit score. And ultimately, if I wanted to travel, or I want insurance, or I want credit cards or something along those lines, I may not get them because they have that information. They have that draconian sense, and that's their thought, their process, and to each their own. But that's a direction that people could go in if it becomes centralized, if it becomes authoritarian, if it becomes something that where the governments are a part of that. Those are the types of things we need to think about. Okay, that's it today. I appreciate everyone joining. As always, if there are any questions, I am more than happy to talk about this. Myself, I have a team of technical client managers that are also involved in these types of things as part of the group. Alicia, I thank you very much for helping out here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. You can see some of the information there on the board, but thank you again.